welcome to the podcast Too Much Disinformation, the pod that uncovers the good, the bad, and the fake of the online world. I'm your host, Rafi Mendelsohn, and on today's pod, we're going to be talking about the challenges of misinformation for law enforcement. And talking us through this topic is Chata Spikes, and she is the Public Affairs Director at the City of Atlanta Police Department, so has tons of experience in this area. And she has a background in broadcast journalism at ABC, CNN, amongst others, and she manages communications and crises related to policing in Atlanta. In her role, Chata regularly comes across dis and misinformation in the very fast-paced and high-stakes environment of law enforcement. And she also finds time to lecture in media studies at the Fort Valley State University, and is also the founder of Spike Communications. So we're going to start the conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating one. Hey, Chata, how you doing?
Hello, Rafi. I am excited to be here. How are you?
I am great today, and we're excited to have you here and looking forward to the conversation. Before we get into the conversation, the question I will ask you is, what was your first social media platform?
I am a MySpacer. It was
Mm,
MySpace. I feel old, I feel vintage, but it was MySpace. I remember the excitement about getting a MySpace page. And then I also remember when it just went away because, the infamous Facebook made its way to social media. And then I went from MySpace, of course, to Facebook. But I was in college with a MySpace page.
nice, nice. I'm following lots of music accounts as well because it was really centered around music was a big emphasis.
Oh, yes. I remember, I can't remember the name of the platform, but I remember downloading music and everybody was, did you get this download? Did you get that download? And then, of course, it would crash your computer. I remember those days.
Amazing, amazing. And one of the objectives of this podcast is to have people on that are really on the front line of coming across and fighting against mis and disinformation. And I can't think of many better candidates to have on in your role. You know, someone who is in law enforcement. It's so fast paced. You have so many different hats you have to wear. And then all of a sudden, as well, maybe not all of a sudden, but you also have the challenge of dealing with fake information, of influence operations, of dis or misinformation. And that's really, I think, kind of what we want to delve into today in this conversation. So maybe just let's start with kind of, what does disinformation and misinformation look like at the Atlanta Police Department?
Two things we've got to be able to do. People have got to trust us and they got to know that we're trained. And when they trust us, that's the result of our training. If you've been trained properly, then people feel confident in what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it as well from this, and I always have to say think about it because I want you to really put yourself in my shoes. For me to tell the story, I also have to combat misinformation. I have to combat information such as the police training, the public safety training center will be militarized. There won't be any Black Hawk helicopters, no tanks. There won't be anything like that. I have to compete with scare tactics, where people are saying that it's going to be something that is going to disrupt neighborhoods. So those are things that I have to combat. But I think with shows like this, where I'm able to share what
Mm-hmm.
misinformation and disinformation can do, because it can scare people, and
Mm.
people sometimes our emotions will dictate how we sway or what we think, and our emotions will sometimes get ahead of the facts. And what I want to be able to do is show the facts that this is something we need. And
Mm-hmm.
Rafi, I can go on and on about this. So you just jump in whenever you're ready.
Well, I was going to ask, maybe for those who are unaware, or people outside of the US who are listening, maybe if you could just explain briefly what the Public Safety Training Center is.
So, the city of Atlanta, of course, we have some of the best first responders in the world. Our firefighters, as well as our police officers. It also includes our civilian employees who are a part of the various departments. We
Mm-hmm.
need a facility to train. So now under our current administration, under Mayor Andre Dickens, he sees that public safety is it's a priority for him. So he wants to move forward with us constructing a public safety training center that will provide the space and the various items that we need. So
Mm.
our city's rapidly growing, and that means our police department and our fire department has to rapidly grow and change with the times. Just like there was, a time where we didn't have the different social media platforms, but as people evolved and things grow, what happens? Social media grows. As people evolve and things change,
Yeah.
even in the healthcare industry, you got to change with the times. And in order for us to recruit, we got to have the training facilities, and we've got to be able to promote our department and show people that when you come to Atlanta and you are trained to become a firefighter, a police officer, or work as a paramedic with our fire department, you've got to have the space and the place to do so. And so that's what
Mm.
we're trying to do.
And I know you, since you've taken on the role, that the challenges, the role, the way that the whole police department and the communications that you work on a day-to-day basis, that's evolved. How has that evolved since you first joined?
So since I've joined, of course, as we talked about at the top of the show, I remember when there was MySpace. Now we have so many different platforms, but it's evolved from with law enforcement. It's evolved with technology and how they fight crime and how
Hmm.
our officers fight crime, but it hasn't always evolved in the forward facing the public sphere. And when I
Mm.
say that, with using social media. So departments like APD, we've gotten up to the times of using more than just a graphic to tell our story. We're telling our story utilizing actual video, body worn camera video. We tell the story that way. And that's something that we do in my office. I feel one of the biggest things I feel that people need to be able to see and hear is what an officer goes through, and
Mm.
by having giving people access, that inside access, by using the body worn camera footage, I think that helps with the evolution. And we
Interesting.
have people who say, well, I didn't know, I didn't realize it. That officer, I'll give you an example. An officer was on the side of the road and he was helping someone, and a car hit him, and we put that body worn camera footage out, and people said, oh my gosh, I didn't
Mm.
realize it. He was on the side of Interstate 85, and it was like the Atlanta Motor Speedway. It was like a raceway, cars just speeding by. And we showed that video, and people reached out saying, we never knew. We didn't even realize, because we're always in our cars, we didn't realize how fast the cars are going. And this officer is actually helping someone, and he's hit. And
Mm.
I think that's a part of the evolution, being able to use
Mm.
the various platforms to bring people into our world.
And social media obviously has proliferated. Is it a help or a hindrance for you in your
It
role?
can be both. It can be both. And I'll give you an example. I like giving examples.
Please do.
We had a situation in a park where a young lady was at a park. She and a gentleman were at a park after hours. There was a video that either the young lady or the young man posted on social media. In that video, you only see a portion of it.
Mm.
And it was late at night when I got the video. By that next morning, that video had gone viral. And in that video, people were slamming APD. You all should have done better. You all should have been more patient with her. However, I had to use social media to tell our side of the story.
Hmm.
When you saw the video in its entirety, everything changed. So
Mm.
in one hand, it was it was being used in a method to show something that really didn't happen. And when I say really didn't happen, yes, the young lady was arrested, but you only saw a portion.
Hmm.
So it lost some of its context. But when we actually posted the entire video, we gained that context back, and people saw that we were
Hmm.
patient. Our officer was very patient with the young lady.
Mm.
The officer had told her more than 20 times that she needs to put her hands behind her back. He even explained you need to sign the ticket. So those are situations in which social media can be a hindrance, but
Hmm.
because we have a voice and we were able to show the video in its entirety, it helped to tell a better story.
And so, and whether it's a help or a hindrance, and it sounds, it's clearly a bit of both. One thing that it has brought about is the speed at which things happen, the speed at which information spreads. How do you? I'm just, can't. I can only imagine the number of times, even on a daily basis, that there's a story and that you need to try and get ahead of it. But first, you need to get all the facts and then make sure that everything's correct. How do you deal with the increase in speed that social media has brought about?
We just adapt. You learn how to adapt. I've learned to live with my phone. You just learn how to adapt. My team, we monitor social. Some of the different platforms and some of the big influencers, we've gained relationships. We've grown relationships with them. And if they see something, we ask them, hey, share it, let us know. And then some people tag us and tell us, but we just have learned how to keep up with the momentum. We know that I make it a point to check social throughout the day. I have team members who check social media just so we know what's the hot topic, what's the hot story. It may not
Hmm.
necessarily be an Atlanta story, but it may be a story that's impacting law enforcement in another state, in another city.
Mm.
It may
Hmm.
be even another country, but we just try to make sure we make ourselves an end user. I always say, let's operate like we're on the other side, not
Hmm.
APD, but we're the end user. We're the person who's looking for the hot topic, the big
Hmm.
story. We're looking for what's viral. So by doing that, it does help us stay ahead. Are there times when we have to scramble? Yeah, there are. There are going to always be those times because you don't have access to everybody's social media. You don't have access to everybody's page. But one of the big things that we do is when there is misinformation and disinformation, we have a method of using what we call accuracy alerts to make sure we show our side of what's been put out there. With an
So
accuracy
what does
alert,
that what does that tell us about accuracy alerts?
so, an accuracy alert is something that we started following a situation. There was a crime that took place, and we told a reporter, hey, that information that you're about to put out is not correct. I
Hmm.
mean, the reporter he did put the information out, and it caused an uproar. So we had to go back and say, no, here is the accurate information. So what we do is we use the accuracy alert only when we have to, only when we absolutely have to really push out the facts,
Mm.
especially if it's a situation in which we know that we have already stated what you've said is not going to be correct. And so I
Mm.
have to be able to stand on correcting misinformation, and I have to stand on setting the record straight. So at
I see.
times we use accuracy alert or we use point of clarification. Point of
Mm.
clarification is something we use when the reporter may have it right just a little bit, but then they didn't provide the entire content to
Hmm.
provide context. And
Mm.
so we don't want someone to think one thing when they need to know more information, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
It's just like giving you a set of instructions, but I only give you step one and step two, but I don't give you the remaining steps. So you're not sure. We want to make sure that we clarify information so people have everything they need. And in this case, it was related to pay and bonuses for new hires. The story read as if though every single person who signed up was going to get a certain amount, and that wasn't the case. So we had to go and just clarify the information. And so those
Mm.
are things that we do when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, or just lack of content. Because
I see.
sometimes we do deal with reporters and even and not just reporters, just the everyday person where we may
Hmm.
have to give them the actual information. They may have some of it, but not all of it.
And let us separate for a moment misinformation from disinformation. I'd imagine in the pace, as we discussed, the speed at which you work and have to be on top of issues. It's so easy for misinformation to spread. People have lack of context, as you mentioned, or some of the facts, and it takes time for all of the facts maybe to reveal themselves or to be properly investigated. Investigations are happening; they have maybe might not have concluded. There's a certain amount you can talk about, and so therefore there's kind of information being spread that isn't completely correct. So that's kind of the misinformation side of it. What about disinformation, which I think points towards maybe more the intent, or that the actors behind it maybe might have more of a malicious motivation? Is that something that you've come across, and how do you deal with that?
So we have come across a disinformation more recently as it relates to the Public Safety Training Center, where information is going out that is blatantly incorrect.
Mm.
Um, I'll even go back to I use this example over and over again, back to we're militarizing. That is not the case.
And what
That
do you
has
think's the motivation behind that?
we do have people who don't like law enforcement,
Mm.
who don't like government. So
Hmm.
sometimes that plays a role. Some Think about it. If there's something that a person doesn't like, sometimes they will create more negatives. Even if they're just creating them in their mind, they're
Hmm.
creating more negatives than they are positives.
Mm.
And so instead of seeing the positives that could be possibly be a fact, they continue just to create more negatives. And it's just like that ripple effect, like a snowball effect. It just gets bigger and bigger and
Mm.
bigger. And then so I have to find myself in a space of getting in front of it. We share information on our social media platforms that have the truth. An
Hmm.
example is we actually show people in videos. We did videos for the police department and the fire department showing where they were training,
Mm.
showing that they were training in facilities that were just they were subpar. And
Mm.
when I was able to show that, more and more people said, "Wow, had I known that, I probably wouldn't have listened to the opposition." And
Mm.
sometimes whoever's the loudest is who will get the most attention.
I see.
And like I said, when you don't like something, you tend to have more and more reasons not to like it. It's like being
Mm.
a kid. If you don't like a certain vegetable, you'll come up with every reason why you don't want to eat it. And before you know it, that's something that can cause a ripple effect. I mean, I
Yeah.
know I see it every day. I see situations in which I'm like, that's not true.
Mm.
And disinformation can oftentimes lead to misinformation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
begin to be, I consider them like a married couple. They get together and then the entire situation is completely has changed. It's almost like the telephone game. You remember playing the telephone game as a child? One person starts, they get that little secret word or that secret phrase, and by the time you get to the last person, it's completely changed. Misinformation and disinformation kind of they do that. It
Right.
causes a ripple effect that it starts, the truth may be there, but you mishear, or you didn't want to receive it, because a part
Hmm.
of communication is sending and receiving. And sometimes people don't want to receive the information. And if when they
Mm.
choose not to receive, they change the information.
Yeah. And so you've spoken really eloquently about how you deal with the facts and the information related to both misinformation, disinformation, whether it's alerts and points of clarification and then following up and using social media and using maybe more traditional methods as well. Have you ever had situations where you have to progress that from the facts and the information to the individual themselves? If there is someone who is putting out regular incorrect information that has malicious intent, and they are kind of a bad actor, real or fake, how do you ever have to deal with the person itself, and how do you do that?
It's been a few times where I have dealt with a person and I've had to just go in and send them. And I oftentimes say, you may not be well informed, but I'll help you. Let me inform you. I recently had to do that. A reporter asked one question, and they asked that question. It was not a question that we could answer as a department because it was not in our wheelhouse. But that same reporter went on the air and said that we refused to talk. No,
Mm.
you asked us one question. We could not answer it because it was not our law enforcement agency. And then you say that we didn't want to talk. So I went back to that reporter directly and said, "Hey, here's what we've got to do. I'm going to need you to really tell everyone provide the entire context, because you only asked us one question. But with your story, it's as if though, since we couldn't answer that one question, you didn't ask us any others. But you should have asked more questions, more than just that one, because
Mm.
in your story, you say that we didn't want to talk, and that's not the case. So I have had
Mm.
to actually go to a reporter and say, "Hey, let's just check your facts." And be mindful. I was once a reporter and producer, so I
Mm.
do know you got to have your facts. You got to have your facts. And I think that's something that is a dying And when I say dying, I'm not seeing that many people checking their facts as much as when I was working in news full time.
Hmm.
I'm not seeing people checking their facts as much as they used to. It Rumors now become factual in some people's
Mm.
eyes, and I
Hmm.
do. That's one of our challenges is rumors, which are misinformation and disinformation.
Right. And so looking forward now, both for Atlanta and also other law enforcement agencies, around the world, what do you think are the main challenges that are either existing now or even, haven't started yet in the future?
Wow, where do I start? Some of our challenges are law enforcement is a very traditional, very routine industry. It is one in which it hasn't really evolved as a
Hmm.
whole,
Hmm.
and I think that's one challenge. It Law enforcement has to evolve in a way in which departments and have public information officers, people who do what I do, people who can share information. We've got some law enforcement agencies and public safety agencies that are doing amazing work, but people don't know.
Hmm.
Um, I think it has to come out of the silo. Law enforcement, I do think that specifically more so for police, some police departments have become guarded. And when I say guarded, when something happens in another city or in their own city, and sometimes they feel under attack, they kind of pull away. They do
Hmm.
their job, but they pull away, and they sometimes tend to, I don't want to use the word forget, but they fall back.
Hmm.
They fall back and they don't make themselves as present as they were prior to something negative happening. I think law enforcement agencies have to continue to stay in the forefront, continue to be there for the citizens and the residents and the stakeholders and the visitors who come to their cities or live in their cities or towns, or
Hmm.
their villages. I think they have to stay in the forefront. Even when something happens, you still got to get out there and answer those calls for service. And I do think that some of the challenges also include, we've talked about it, misinformation and disinformation, but I think other challenges have been having the right people in the right positions. Law enforcement, like I said before, is very traditional. It is, you can go somewhere and the person has been the chief for 40 years. And that's fine if you're the chief for 40 years, but you got to evolve as the time evolves. You got to
Hmm.
evolve and bring in things like technology to help you. You've got
Hmm.
to have, I mean, people look at some of the television shows that are out there and people always ask, do you all have analysts? And do you have, yes, we do. Some of the things you see on television, they're not real, not real at
Hmm.
all. But there are some things that mimic what we do. And I do think sometimes television can be a challenge, because people have a level of expectation that doesn't really exist in the real world. Some of the things they do on television really have people thinking, but you can do it just that fast. And I have to remind folks, that's TV. It doesn't happen that fast. We're dealing with real people, not actors. And so sometimes that can also be a challenge. That's something I think a lot of people probably don't even think about. But what people see on television and what's real life are totally different. I do say television mimics real life and mimics what we do. But I know I've gone to scenes and people automatically ask me, hey, is there going to be a camera crew here? Are you all going to have a camera crew jump out the back of the truck? Now, you do have different shows that have that, but in real life, it's about solving that crime. It's about bringing closure
Right.
to the families. It's not about being on the next commercial, on the next television show. It's about reducing crime, stopping crime, helping families, and saving lives. And then not only that, making sure our firefighters and our police officers get back home to their families.
Nice, nice, amazing. I think this whole conversation has been so fascinating. It's been amazing to have your perspective, of how you deal with these challenges, how these challenges have evolved, and what the future holds. Before we leave, I have to ask you a question of, if you could give us one good thing, one bad thing, and one fake thing that you're seeing in the online space today.
Okay, so my good thing is, I think for me and what I see on social media platforms, it's a great way to connect. Um, we live busy lives, and sometimes we can't be there for every great thing that happens in people that we love in their lives, but we're able to be connected. You're able to see gender reveals. I may be in one city and a cousin may be in another, and it's like I can be there.
Hmm.
It can connect families. I think about soldiers who are off, who are deployed, and they can still be there with their families. You can share those good fun things in life, and then you can even share some of the sorrows in life, and you can be there for a family member. If there's been a death in a family or something has happened, you might not be able to be there physically, but you can be there virtually. I think you told me a good,
One
a bad,
good, now one bad.
one bad. One of my bads is the bullying.
Mm.
Cyberbullying, I think, is something that I think that I wish there was a way to better police it. I think sometimes people get a lot of courage, negative courage behind a
Mm.
screen, behind a camera, and behind a keyboard, and they use it in a negative way. There are so many ways that social media and the online space has been used positively. I
Hmm.
think that the negative aspect makes it bad. And when I say
Mm.
bad, bullying is something I just don't like. I don't tolerate. I don't think I can't think of anyone who wants to be bullied.
Hmm.
So I think that's one of the bads, that this it can put you in a space of bullying and scams, because I feel like all of that's the same, and
Mm.
scams are like a subtle way to bully someone. You're bullying someone out of money, and I think the bad part that the part that I don't like about it is our victims are usually our most precious people, our children and our elderly. And I'm a big person on don't harm children, don't harm old people, and don't harm animals. And I oftentimes see that most of our victims are children and the elderly.
Mm. Okay.
So just
And
that last one,
fake, something fake.
fake, about social media. You know what? As I love I love AI, but I am afraid of what may come with it. I'm
Hmm.
afraid of just some of the things that are now fake that
Mm.
come with it. I think it's real, but it's fake at the same time, if that makes sense.
It does. It does make
I
a lot of
I
sense.
think that's that part that I think you can fool someone
Hmm.
by using AI. I mean, I look at the situations. I just saw a story where someone was scammed through a fake voice, and that's kind of scary for me,
Mm.
because I have an elderly grandmother, and I always say don't answer the phone if you don't know the number, because it's fake. I'll tell her
Hmm.
that's not a real call. So I think that's the fake part. I think AI is great and it can be used in such a great way, but it wows me how something good can go bad, and I think
Yeah.
that fake part of it is what scares me.
Fascinating. Wow, this has been a great conversation. I've loved it. I've learned a lot. I'm sure all of our listeners would have as well. And so, thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through this. Shatta, it's been
Really.
great to speak to you today. Thanks for coming on.
Certainly, it has been my pleasure. I hope that everyone's been able to learn, grow, get some truthful information as it relates to the city of Atlanta. If you come to Atlanta, make sure you visit us and come and enjoy your time here. I am excited. I wish you so much more success with everything that you're doing, Rafi. It has been my pleasure.
Thank you so much. And for all the listeners, have a great day. Bye now.